I love everything that you do, but I hate the way that you move.
All right, and we're on the air, YouTube. Welcome back to my channel, you guys. If y'all are new here, my name is Angel Uchiha. If y'all are not new, then of course, welcome back. As y'all can see by the title of today's video, we are once again getting into, topics that are very important within our community. Before we jump into today's discussion, I do want to go ahead and introduce Mr. Raymond. How you doing today? Want to tell
Well,
the people a little bit about yourself?
okay. Well, my name is Raymond Forte. I am in Phoenix, Arizona. I am a musician. I'm an author. I am the religious chair for the NAACP for the state of Arizona, and also a proud father of one. And I mentioned I was an author, yeah, and a former senior pastor as well.
Okay. Okay. So you have a lot on your plate. You wear a lot of different hats.
I do.
So you said you are the chairman for the NAACP
Yes,
religious
I'm the religious chair for the NAACP.
religious chair. There you go. Can you break that down a little bit for us?
So my job is we have 9 branches of the NAACP here in the state of Arizona, and so I represent
Mhm.
state level. And so what I do is I just gather, and I was recently voted April 1st. So my job would be to gather churches, gather different faith gatherings, and to join them and work with them so that we can advance not just Black people but any people of who are oppressed, who's been wrongly, who's been experienced, who's experienced injustice, who's experienced anything that's unfair. My job is to get to the religious community so that they have a voice in what's going on and around us. So,
Okay. Okay. So that's absolutely beautiful. As many of y'all know here on this channel, we definitely value action, right? We value people who aren't just, speaking about what's going on within the community, but people that actually go out there and try to be a part of the solution. So I definitely love to hear that. So would you want to give us a little bit of insight into what your perspective is? Are you Christian?
yeah,
Do you belong to a specific denomination?
I am Christian. I don't
Hmm.
not a part of a denomination per se. I am a part of
Hmm.
other leaders and pastors, but not necessarily we're not a denomination. But
Okay.
I am very much Christian.
Okay. Okay. So I love to hear that as well. So the reason why I was curious is because how we actually ended up, crossing each other's paths was when I released the video that I did with Akasha, and shout out to her. And we were speaking on how often within, whether it's the religious community, whether it's the conscious community, as women, when we step into our spiritual journey, a lot of times we encounter some form of oppression or limitation in which our spiritual journey is attached to a man. And usually it's attached in a way that is subservient to that man, right? And I know that you had gave your feedback on that, that post, and I wanted to have you come on today to kind of just express where your perception was coming from.
Indeed. So my perception came from I was on the rec- I was on the receiving end of oppression. Not saying now this is not a woe is me type of situation, but I was in a marriage and I was with someone who saw my potential but put their limits on me, right? And it's not to say that
Hmm.
every situation, but I experienced oppression with someone who didn't want to see me grow, who didn't see me advance. She would say it
Hmm.
in words, but action did not follow with that. And so I was speaking anecdotally, but I do acknowledge that for the most part, in mass, men who are not secure in their own journey, who are not secure in where they're supposed to go, do limit and oppress the women that are close to them because they have no identity. I see my father do it, and so I don't negate or neglect or ignore that part when it comes to women in their spiritual because it happens often.
So I definitely understand your perspective as well, as far as on an individual level, right? On a micro level, I'm very aware that there are many men and women who are oppressive of each other in various different ways, right? So the intention of that video was not to paint this image as though, all men are just these oppressive, controlling, evil. That wasn't the goal, right? We were more so speaking towards religion and spiritual practices where tied into the core belief, there is a division between man and woman in the sense of, okay, the woman is the weaker vessel, right? The woman is to be subservient to her husband. The woman, in Islam, for example, that's something I spoke about, where men and women, half of our deen is completed through marriage. However, in marriage, the woman is expected to be submissive and obedient to her husband. So only one of us experiences a limitation on our free will when we fulfill that other half of our deen, right? So I understand your perspective of you not being a man who is oppressive and controlling of his woman, right? But as a Christian, when we look at the scripture, right? Do you see the scriptures, the beliefs that separate the woman
Absolutely,
and insinuate that she is in some way secondary to a man?
absolutely. Because there are, those scriptures where Paul talks about where Paul, says Paul mentions, being obedient to uh, your husband. I think Jesus also talks about that too. But he also emphasizes where men must be the chief sacrifice in the relationship. And I think in that, that's where it's missing in the conversation. I think men oftentimes
Mm.
understand that in order to even see a form of submission, that we must be fully submitted. And a lot of times men oppress women to their submission because they're not submitted to their own identity, uh, or not even and they're not submitted to their God or to their higher power, whether it's Christ or Allah in Islam or. So I think what's missing in that conversation is men not being submitted to the higher power or having a submitted heart or a humbled heart. um, Not negating that there are scriptures that talk about women being subservient to the husbands or whatnot, but it should come with the understanding that men should come with the mindset of sacrifice, not what I'm here to gain, what can I give. If that makes sense.
Okay, so you're essentially saying that though the belief is that women should be submissive to their husband, the husband should come with the mentality of not arrogance or control, but being of service himself, right?
Exactly, exactly. And he's also submitted to
Okay.
his he's also submitted to his children. He's submitted to, his form of work, his living. We have to
Mhm.
be totally. Our lives should reflect submission. And so, if we want the submitted uh, service from our wives or from our communities or whatever, then we as men and as leaders must come with a heart of service and selflessness to see.
Mhm.
I think that part of the conversation for men is missing.
Okay. And so that's something that I definitely can understand, right? I believe that that is balance. So for example, here in my family, in the society, the culture that we're working on building, we take a more matriarchal approach, right? But it has that same mentality of egalitarianism is the ultimate goal and the ultimate root. So even whether a relationship or a household is led by a man, by a woman, it's never supposed to be a situation to where somebody's on a leash, being treated as a less than,
Right.
right? It is a give and take. It's a checks and balances type of system. And so I completely understand that notion of just because a woman is expected to submit to her husband, that doesn't necessarily mean that he is a dictator over her, right? However, right, just being someone who, reads the scripture, who reads the Quran, I can definitely see how certain content within that can lead men to adapt the mentality that they are superior to a woman, which can end up affecting his leadership, right? So for example, I guess like the most popular is the situation with Eve, right? I know a lot of men who use that as an example to say, look, see, when Adam listened to a woman, she led him astray because women are the weaker vessel and they were tempted and da 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 and blah 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 and do 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 do, right? And so I can see how these anecdotes can be used as fuel to say this is why we don't listen to women, because they're easier to be led astray, because they're the weaker vessel, because it says right here in the scripture that we're not supposed to listen to y'all and blah 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 and do 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 do, right? So how do you balance, right, as someone who doesn't have the desire to look down on a woman, right? How do you balance scriptures like that with your desire for respect and equality?
I would balance it because I would balance it by saying that were in leadership in scriptures. There were women who were judges in scripture. There were women who, if we go down to, just even Christ, there were women who followed Jesus. There were women who, served with Jesus, and he didn't treat them any less. Matter of fact, he turned a woman who had five husbands, lived with the one she had. He turned her into an evangelist. So having said that, I balanced that with scriptures showing where power was given to women, and where what's the word, empowerment and encouragement was given to women, because just as much as they're submissive, they're also powerful in their own right if we birth that out of them and we pull that out of them as men and as leaders. So that's how I pretty much balance it, because you can't take one particular text and make that the baseline for why you don't believe in women, or listen in to women, or believe in their role in society. I think that you have to look at all of it and come with your own decision and interpret it the way, hopefully in a healthy way, so that it can move forward. You can move forward with your family and just move forward in how you treat the women around you.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is essentially the balance comes from reading the scripture without bias, right? Confirmation bias. So being able to see like, okay, yes, this was a situation to where a woman was astray, right? And she may have lost a bit of that authority or autonomy, but there's plenty other scriptures where women were in positions of leadership and they had, you know, the same respect that we're given to men, right? So I definitely agree with you that there are a lot of people who tend to like cherry pick certain things out of the scripture because it fits their agenda, right? So that's absolutely fair. So just changing direction just a little bit. I noticed that one of the other things that you spoke about when you were responding to that reel was the choice that women make when it comes to men, right? Um, is that something that you want to touch bases on here? Maybe give your perspective on that.
Indeed, I mean, I think a lot of, and this goes definitely both ways. Let me just say that. But I think sometimes, I think with women, I've seen where, and I've experienced where, women get with men and it's clear as day that they're on the outside, like, okay, they're not on the same wavelength, but the woman doesn't see it because she's enamored by, her partner, she's enamored in her emotions, and so that's totally okay. But that doesn't eliminate accountability from possibly seeing red flags, from seeing things that could have possibly said, okay, this is a red flag or a yellow flag, proceed with caution type of thing. Because, there's, while there's good in everybody, there's something about that person that may not be good for you for your future. Right. And so, having said that, we can't act totally oppressive when we contributed to the oppression by choosing who we chose. One of the reasons why my relationship didn't work is because hey, I chose. That's who I chose, and that's no knock on them. That doesn't make them not a good person, or they are who they are. But I can't eliminate accountability or responsibility from my end because I chose that person. And I think, and so that will move the conversation forward. The women just said, hey, I saw the red flags, but I was enamored by what I was enamored by. And, I have to now make better decisions in my vetting process versus, ignoring the red flags because of my own needs and desires.
Okay, so I actually could not agree more, right? I think that's something that may unsettle a lot of my women subscribers, right? But this is something that I actually was just speaking about today. I just made a post today and, shouted out a fellow content creator who was speaking on the concept of women victimizing themselves in situations that don't have a favorable outcome, right? So we'll see a lot of times where people are like, oh, he's a narcissist and he manipulated me into doing this and manipulated me into doing that and blah, 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 right? And as a woman who has been in a very abusive relationship, physically, mentally, emotionally, I've been in, financially abusive relationships, the whole nine. I acknowledge where I made deliberate decisions, right? And I can't sit here and say, oh, I was forced, I was manipulated. You play a hand in allowing somebody to guide you down a certain path. Unless they're putting a gun to your head and dragging you, right? There was something that you saw that made you decide, you know what? I see this red flag. I see this poor behavior. I see this and feel this thing that makes me very uncomfortable, but I'm going to choose to ignore this because of X, Y, and Z. So that may be different things. It may be something as simple as, like you said, oh, the lust, the attraction, being enamored with that person. In my case, there was having a certain goal or a mission of like, look, I don't like how he's doing shit, but we come this far and I really want to accomplish this. I really want to complete what we said we were going to do. So I'm going to sacrifice and just kind of roll with it or see if we can make it work so that I can get to that point. But I saw those red flags, right? It could be, I'm lonely. I don't want to be alone. I want companionship. We see that. And any female who sits here and says that she doesn't, you're lying. You at some point had a moment in your head where you're like, I don't like this, but, and whatever that but is the reason why you stayed in that situation. So you cannot keep putting it off on that other person and saying, well, they manipulated me and they talked me into it. And So I completely understand that perspective as well. Now, what I will say is indoctrination is a thing, right? Growing up in a society that normalizes certain behavior from the moment that a child is born plays a role in their decision making in that moment. And this is men and women, right? So if you grow up in a situation, I'll give you a prime example. Me and my husband were talking about coercion, right? And how there are a lot of things within our community that we normalize as, oh, that's just an expression of love. But by law, these things are coercion, right? So like, for example, the mentality of, oh, you ain't going nowhere, like you mine. Like if the man says he's done with you or the woman says she's done with you and you're like, no, you're not. Like, you stand with me, you're my, that's coercion. That's technically coercion, right? But because that type of pattern has been normalized in our community for so long, we may not look at it like that. We may look at it as passion or a sign that this person is in love with me or whatever the case may be, right? So I'm just saying that to say that normalizing certain poor behavior in our children as they're developing up into adults can have a major effect on the type of partners that they choose in
Speaking of
their adulthood.
children,
Yeah. No, I feel I'm surprised my daughter ain't coming here yet.
say hi.
Hi.
All right, go back downstairs with
He's
Nani.
like, what y'all doing in here? Oh, his little braids.
Go back downstairs. That'll be done in a minute. But yeah, so I want to, I don't want to negate the experiences that your female viewers have. You know, I'm very sure, and I've been that guy. Women have fallen into the hands of my BS before I had to, so I will not negate that men, when we're not healed, we can be some individuals sometimes when we don't, have our mindset all the way together. So I don't negate that. I think that though the conversation moves forward when accountability is acknowledged on both ends.
Exactly. And I think like a good percentage of that is us learning to stop associating accountability with fault,
Mm.
right? Or saying, because I
Oh,
think that's what people hear. When people hear like, oh, you should take accountability for the role you played in something. So you're saying it's my fault that he abused me? You're saying it's my fault that no, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is there's a problem here, right? And in order to provide the solution for that problem, we need to be able to identify all the factors that contributed to creating that problem,
right.
right? And one of the factors is the choices that you made, right? And I think that shift in mentality is going to be a big part of the solution to solving a lot of the issues that are within our community,
That
right? So what do you think a solution is for this issue that we're having?
again, I think pointing the finger is not going to hold. Is not going to solve it. I think if we collectively and individually say, "How did I contribute to the problem?" How can I contribute to the solution? So, whatever that solution looks like for you. If it's not dating for a while so that you can go to therapy, if it's really doing some introspection. I think we have to individually and collectively do introspective work so that we can collectively move forward. As a community. Go downstairs for Nani. As a community, as a people. So I think like I said, being introspective individually, and we can.
So I do like to dig, right? I don't know if you watch some of my content, but I am a little bit of a pot stirrer, right? So I do want to double back to patriarchal religions, right? And the belief systems that are found there. So you spoke about how, well, we both spoke about how there is a bit of a balance within the scripture as far as there are women in positions of leadership.
Mhm,
People just choose to ignore those positions, right? But
mhm.
I think that we can both acknowledge that the vast majority of prophets, of judges, of kings, right, um, were men.
Yes, yes, we can acknowledge that.
So yeah, so we can, so I certainly understand that women were in positions of leadership in the most technical sense of the word, right? But when we've looked at the lawmakers, the direct messengers of God, right? The people who have the real power to influence and lead the masses, were they women equally or even a fraction women
No, it weren't. No,
compared to.
no, they weren't equally
Mhm.
in power.
Okay,
Uh,
and so why do you think that is?
eating that bacon that's sitting in the turned off oven?
Yeah, you can take it out. You can take it out if you need to, because I forgot I had a podcast. Why you think that is? Okay, so this is where my honest I don't know comes in. I could guess that men were preferred in leadership, depending on their democracy or dictatorship. However, so I mean, it could be that it could be preference. It could be, how they were positioned. I'm giving an honest, I don't know.
Okay, that's a win. I could take that. Because I think that's the healthiest answer sometimes. Okay.
I hear you.
Yeah, so I think that's the healthiest answer sometimes. It's just I don't know, right? Because a lot of people don't, a lot of people try to make something up if they don't know, right? So I can definitely respect that. My honest opinion, like you said, I was not there during this time, but I do a lot of extensive research into theology, into societies of antiquity. That's one of my favorite things to review and dig into, right? And honestly, I don't think it has anything to do with God. I personally think it's entirely political, right? Like you said, I think that at that time, men were preferred for positions of leadership. On a political and social level, men were in a hierarchical position over women, right? And so I think as human beings, not even think, I know as human beings that our religion and our spiritual systems reflect our mentality as a collective.
I agree.
Right. And I think that because the collective was largely patriarchal at the time, the religious text reflected that. Right. So where I began to kind of take issue with this is because then this gets construed and attached to being the will of God. Right. And so that's where I think of, where do we lay that boundary? Where do we determine what is the perception of man and what is the will of God, right? And how can, in some situations, I think that we can be inspired by God, but because of it having no choice but to be filtered through our human mind and our human perspective, we can overlay the will of God with our own will. That's how I kind of think. Right.
I know.
And
I agree.
so, mhm.
No, I agree with
Okay,
that.
so as a minister, right, are you doing anything to address that patriarchal influence on the word of God?
I mean, when you say, well, when you say address the patriarchal influence, like, are you asking, am I using my position to advocate for women to be in positions of leadership? Or do you mean like that? Like, or what do you mean?
That could be an example, yeah.
No,
That could
I
be an example.
definitely
Yeah.
advocate. I definitely, advocate for, especially in our sector of ministry, um, women are not always acknowledged and revert. So recently, I just did. We had our Good Friday when I was pastoring. I had a Good Friday service, and I had two women, speak for my church. I have women who, led ministry, who led ministries to, feed the homeless. I have women help me with my administrative work. And so I use my platform, and I even use my platform to, advocate to have more women in the pulpit if they're good and qualified, for the position, and they done the work. So I definitely use my position of influence to advance women and to encourage women to move forward and to rise to in their field. Now, let me ask you, do you think, and I know you're asking me questions, but let me ask you, do you think that should come at a cost? Do you think that with men encouraging women, should we also say that comes with a cost as well?
let me make sure I understand what you're asking, right? So when you say with encouraging women to take those positions of leadership, do I think that should come at a cost? A cost to who? A cost to the
No, no.
women?
What do you think the message? Do you think that in that in that there should be a reality or a sober reality that, hey, this may not come while you have this position of leadership, it may not come with what you want to see in a home or in a relationship or whatnot.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So do I think that women who rise into those positions of leadership may have to sacrifice some of the traditional expectations that they have with adapting that position of leadership?
Correct.
So my honest answer to that is truly it depends on who that woman is and who she's sharing that leadership with, right? Now, the reason why I word it like that is because I actually recently did a podcast here with my husband where I asked him, right, as a man that is in the within the matriarchal community, do you feel like you have had to sacrifice what it means to be a man or to be masculine? Or have you had to change the roles that a man is expected to play because of that, right? And he said no. In most matriarchal men that I find, they say no, right? And the reason why I think that is because those of us who are implementing the idea of women stepping into positions of power, we don't look at that as something that is taking away from the man, right? And saying, oh, a role reversal. That's what I'm trying to say. Is it's not a role reversal in a sense of, well, I'm wearing the pants now. So, you're going to have to do what I'm expected to do. And I'm going to have to. No, we believe that a man leads in his way and a woman leads in hers. Right. So if you desire, for example, your man to be a protector, he can still be a protector, right? You don't have to sacrifice having a man that's a protector just because you now occupy a leadership position, because that is still his character. That's still the qualities that he is good at and he's made to embody. So you holding a certain position shouldn't take away from the nature of who you are and who he is, right?
Okay. I've just seen okay, and I can understand that. When I was so my marriage was more of a matriarchal type of leadership. Like my ex-wife, made more money and all of that. But I couldn't be. But I feel like it took away my masculinity because I couldn't lead her because she had the positions of leadership because she was on a certain socioeconomic level. It's like my voice really didn't matter, right? And again, I know I'm speaking anecdotally, but I speak for men who have been with women who have been in positions of power and used it and abused that position of power to make their man feel less than. And so I think that's why a lot of men are apprehensive to matriarchal societies because it's like, okay, well, she's going to use it against me because I'm not in a certain position, I can't lead her a certain way, which is going to be frustrating for a man, especially a man who really wants to lead, who wants to take charge, who wants to. And that's a man like, I mean, I fit into that role. You know what I mean? It's like I want to take charge. I want to lead. I want to guide. I don't mind paying the cost. But for a man like myself, stepping into that role and being in a matriarchal way, I'm like, not negating their the ability to lead, but it takes away certain aspects of my masculinity that I don't think I'm ready to sacrifice. So
Okay. So I completely understand that, right? And I think first off, to me, that sounds like a poor leader, right? Because I think that we should understand that. Now, take this with a grain of salt, right? Because I know your belief system is traditional, right? I know that there are people watching who they may have more traditional beliefs. However, you want to take it with a grain of salt, y'all. I believe that there's truly masculine and feminine energy in all of us, just like there's testosterone and estrogen in all of us. However, the balance in a man is different than the balance in a woman, right? And that's what makes us our respective counterparts. So I think that you can have women that are patriarchal even though they are women, right? And what do I mean by that? Their masculine energy dominates over their feminine energy, and it comes out in who they are. Even though she has the physical body of a woman, right, her masculine energy is dominating over her feminine energy, and she's going to express that when she speaks, when she carries herself, when she makes decisions, right? And that can be problematic in itself, because the same way, like I said, we have that testosterone, that estrogen balance. If you have too much testosterone as a woman, or if you have too much estrogen as a man, things start to go wrong. Cancer start to develop. You know, bodily functions cease to function in the way that they should, right? So I'm just saying, when you have a woman who is extremely masculine and that's carrying out, it can come out in a way that's not conducive, right? Because that's not her natural energy. That's just my observation. So I'm saying that to say that just because a woman is in a position of leadership does not mean she's leading with her feminine energy and from an optimum perspective. She can be coming from a very controlling and dogmatic and egotistical perspective, especially because America breeds that type of energy,
Mm-hmm.
right? I literally have been digging and researching into how it's found that most people in position of leaderships in America, whether it be CEOs, whether it be, you know, board directors, all of that, they tend to embody certain traits that are considered narcissistic, right? Um, so basically what I'm getting to is we live in a society where being ego driven, being controlling, being money hungry, feeling like you're superior than someone because you have X amount of resources is kind of ingrained into our culture, in our way of thinking. So I'm just saying that to say, just because a woman is in a position of leadership does not mean that she's a good leader. And because of the society that we live in, 9 times out of 10, she's developed poor leadership skills. And she's kind of copying the controlling patriarchal religion or reality that she's been brought up in, right? And so I think that that's what's happening with a lot of these women. And that's why here in our culture, deprogramming, correcting ourselves, and most importantly, carefully vetting and analyzing the women that we allow into our circle is very important to us, because you can't come back over here just repeating patriarchy in a female body, right? That's not the goal here. So I definitely completely understand that. Now, I'm a little nosy, right? So when I invited you to come on the show and all that, I did check out your content, and something that really stood out to me was on March 28th, you had made a post saying, "This is the first time in my ministry where I am the only man on the preaching roster. We are in a new day. I'm excited to see more women behind the sacred desk." Right? So I thought, oh, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. I love to see that. Can you give us a little perspective of, now that we're kind of in this new age, right? And we're seeing situations where you're the only pastor, right? Do you see a visible change in the church or in, the community? Like, do you see changes as a result of seeing more women in leadership?
Yes, I've definitely seen more changes, both good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely I've seen more changes. Good in the sense of women who are actually called to ministry, who have proven track record of their call and their walk with God and their journey with God. They're finally having a voice at the table. And I think that should be, there's scripture, in Amos, when he says that I'll pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and daughters will prophesy. And I think somewhere along the line, because of Paul saying women need to be silent in the church, we missed that. And so,
Mhm.
so with that being said, I'm excited to see women who have been called by God to finally get that voice. Here's where the bad comes in, though, because
Mhm.
because church can be patriarchal, women tend to take on patriarchal traits, as you mentioned earlier, and sometimes it can leak into the home. And so where the disconnect is for women, especially in the churches, you don't have to be the man in the church and in the home. You can
Mhm.
you can be as feminine as you can be without conforming or succumbing to the patriarchal environment. And I think because women feel like they have to in order to survive, it's created a ripple effect, and spilling it and it's spilling over into homes. My ex-wife and I were both pastors, but both of us had big egos. And I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
both of us can't be the man here, and
Mhm.
so and I think is created that problem to where women now, because they've been given power, they've taken the same power that oppressed them to oppress others.
Yeah, which is usually what happened. Bullies usually end up becoming bullies, right?
Hmm.
People who are abused are more likely to either end up in an abusive relationship or be the abuser in a relationship,
Hmm.
right? So I think that's what's happening here. Essentially, women have been in an abusive relationship for
Right.
thousands of years now,
And taking it out on men.
and now that, huh?
And they're now taking it out on men who did nothing to them.
Yeah, they're kind of just projecting that back into whoever is in the line of fire, right? And so that is definitely a major issue. And once again, that's what we're working to do, is to kind of unlearn certain behaviors and work with people who are willing to learn, right? Because I'm a firm believer in judging a book by at least the inside of the cover, right? Where the little synopsis is. Yeah. So certain stuff that you say and do is already kind of an indicator to me of like, this is not a person who needs to be in any position of leadership, and not any, at least not anytime soon, right? So I definitely want to acknowledge that. Now, I did notice that you said that there are scriptures that speak about how both sons and daughters will, prophesize, but there's also scriptures from Paul, which Paul is very interesting to me. And I know the scripture says that about Paul, that his word is very easy to be misconstrued. So, do you think that Paul is saying women are to be silent in the church matched up with the other scriptures that speak about women being able to prophesize? Do you think that's a contradiction,
No, I think
or can those two things exist?
no. And I think he was speaking on women not being silent, being inside of the church, because it was a completely different issue that the Roman Church was dealing with. And
Mhm.
so he was telling the women to be silent for a specific reason. It's not coming to me yet, but it wasn't to say women can't preach. It wasn't to say women can't teach. It wasn't to say women can't contribute their opinion. It wasn't to say that. And so no, they can't coincide, because why are we taking the women's resources if they can't have a voice? So
Exactly.
so no, they can't exist together.
So, see, this is why I say Paul is interesting, right? And I feel interesting ways about
Oh, you
his
and I both.
words.
You and I both.
However, what I will say to Paul's credit is that he was often addressing a specific group of people. So we've seen Galatians, Romans, Gentiles, right? Like he's typically talking to a specific group of people
Mhm.
at a specific time. And I do think we have the tendency to go back thousands of years and pluck this sentence that was said to one group of people and then try to apply it in 2024 and be like, oh yeah, he's talking to me. And it's the same thing in Islam, right? Because we have the Quran, but we also have the Hadith. right? Which are supposedly people, basically like the apostles, giving their account of when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam walked amongst us, right? And they're saying, oh, well, he said this and he said that, and he said that we're supposed to roll our pants up like this, and we're supposed to, and I'm like, okay, this was a story from a time where people were taking care of camels and they had to walk through camel poop, and he's not talking to you in 2024 at your office job.
Right.
Come on. Like, and so I think people,
just like when Jesus says, if there's something in your right eye, or something like that, pluck it out. If something offends your right eye, plug it. Like, no, like it doesn't apply in the literal sense. So yeah.
Exactly. And so that's something that I want to highlight as well, y'all. Is like a lot of the reasons why we think that the scripture or these belief systems are so harsh is because we may be taking something literal that's not supposed to be taken literal, or we may be taking something out of context that doesn't necessarily apply to our current situation. And there are a lot of Christians and Muslims who will say that me saying something like that means that I'm not a real Muslim, right? And you have to take everything exactly how it is. Is that something that you agree with, or is there room to, which I think I know the answer, but just to clarify for the people, is there room to say, okay, we're going to treat our women fairly, we're going to treat each other fairly, even though the scripture says something like women are supposed to be quiet in the church, right? Like those, can we create that balance without having to give up Christianity or Islam?
Absolutely.
Or at least Christianity.
Absolutely. It's just human decency. I mean, you don't need to be a Christian or a Muslim or Islam or Jew or Gentile to treat people fairly. You know what I mean? And so I think it goes beyond just the scripture, or your faith belief. I think, like I said, in 2024, there should be just a common courtesy to treat women fairly, to treat children fairly. So, to use the scripture, to use it, and to use the scripture to justify mistreatment is hypocritical, and not productive. So, yeah, there's a lot of room for that, honestly.
Okay, well, I think that's pretty much all the questions that I have to ask. Is there anything else you want to tell the people before we get out of here?
So my name is Raymond Forte. I'm gonna be relaunching my website, theraymondforte.com. You can follow me on Instagram. My book, Maximizing Mentally, is on Amazon. You can check it out. It's a self-help book for men, but definitely women can benefit from it as well. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Angel, and blessings to you and your family.
Of course. Thank you for coming here. I'm definitely happy that you were able to come on and represent, because like I said, we speak on a lot of different, topics that do involve Abrahamic religions, but this is my first time having somebody on who is actually like an Orthodox believer in, can speak from your perspective, right? So definitely thank you for coming through. Y'all make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe, share, follow him, right?
Follow my YouTube channel too,
And yes, follow him, y'all. All right, peace.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.